Hello folks, this is Tom from anti-proton.com, and I'm here today to talk to you about this guy right here. This is the Skywatcher Star Adventurer, and it's this thing right here. It's not this, it's this thing right here. Now many of you might have seen me unboxing this a little while ago. Now I wanted to put up a video of this earlier, but I couldn't do it because the weather here is terrible. If you get the reference, it's like living in Dagobah. So basically, I can't do a review of something until I've had a chance to use it, and every single day it's just cloudy. But I finally got a few marginally good days to test this out, and I am really happy about it. Now, per FCC rules, let me just state the following: not all of this, but this guy right here, the Star Adventurer, was sent to me by Skywatcher at no cost to me, so free, and they asked me to review it. What happened is I was making inquiries to various companies about getting a tracking mount like this. And I sent them a bunch of questions and asked them, and they, I guess I must have fallen through the cracks or something, and it took a little while before they got back to me. When they got back to me, they're like, oh, we're so sorry, you know, it's been a little while, but here are the answers to your questions. And I said, okay, well, that's good. I have a YouTube channel, and if I like the thing, and if I think about getting it, you know, I'm going to review it. And they're like, hey, well, we can send you one. So, I mean, I figured, okay, I got you. You want me to review it. But I told them, I said straight up, if this is not a good unit, I'm still reviewing it. And so luckily for me, because it would be kind of embarrassing if it didn't go that way, it actually is a good unit. So I'm just making sure you totally understand that I got that for free. So there you go. Those are my FCC rules. Now I will say that I usually don't get anything for free. I usually pay for my stuff. You know, I review stuff all the time, and I usually only review stuff I like. I typically don't review stuff I don't like anyway. I like this guy. I have something else I'm going to be reviewing, another mount pretty soon, but for right this moment I'm checking this guy out first. So let me tell you a little bit about it and what it does. So this mount is for somebody who wants to follow the stars when they take photographs. Because as you know, when you do astrophotography, and I'm not going to get too deep into the details of astrophotography, it's kind of beyond this video, but the stars move, the planets move, the moon moves. But in reality, they're moving and we're moving. But the greatest motion that you see, of course, is the Earth spinning, which from your perspective, because it doesn't seem like we're moving, it appears that they are moving. You notice the stars tend to go across the sky, apparently. Well, anyway, this guy right here compensates for that, and it keeps your camera moving with the stars. It follows the stars around, right? And it can also do some other interesting things. So basically, the question I had for them was this: I'm looking for a mount like this that's only a couple $100s. I'm not looking at spending $10,000. That is capable of reasonably following the stars for at least 30 seconds for an exposure with a camera and a telescope connected to it. That's pretty much the gist of the questions I gave them. They came back and said, yes, we believe our unit can do that. I was skeptical because I've gotten several units before that didn't do that. So I got this guy, and it does it. So I'm going to give you some pros, and I'm going to give you some cons. There are a few things I don't like about this unit. So I'll start off with explaining what it is. So it has a motor drive built into it right here. This is a German equatorial mount. So that means that you point this mount, you turn and, this isn't normally how you do it, but I'm just going to do it like this for quickness. You turn and point this mount at Polaris, the northern star. You adjust it up and down, left and right, until it's pointed at Polaris, because everything apparently spins around Polaris. If you've ever seen one of the star photos that shows the circles pointing around a single star, you'll notice everything tends to spin around Polaris. So let me show you a picture of one of those. Okay, so we've got this pointed at that central axis point. So everything else is going to spin around it. Now that everything else is spinning around the central axis, you can then point your camera at something you want to photograph, and then you can loosen this right here, and you can follow that star as it moves around the sky. That's supposed to be tighter. You can follow that star as it moves around the sky, because you see the star is going to go like this. So when we point at it, we follow it, right? So that's the idea of the German equatorial mount. We follow the axes of the star. So I'm out here on a spring day of airplanes galore, children playing all kinds of fun stuff. But it's better to photograph out here because of the sun than it is to photograph inside of my house. So that's why I chose out here as opposed to my usual location for photography. So that's how the mount basically works in principle. And let me just point out that it doesn't come by default with this. I consider two components here to be essential to using this device. They are not considered essential by the actual manufacturer, but it's one of those things where they're essential. First and foremost is this thing right here. Not the camera, but you see this device right here? It has a weight on it, and it has multiple mount points. And by the way, the mount points are pretty smartly put together. Let me show you. There's a tightening lug right here that tightens this on and makes it stick to the actual metal. Then there's a loosening bracket that's really wide, so you can tighten it, and this won't move. You can loosen it really easily, and then you can move this without having to unscrew this. So that was extremely convenient. Once it's tightened, there's even a little lever on the side you can twist that slowly turns the camera to adjust it to targets. See, that's the thing I liked about this. I liked that there were smart things. Somebody actually sat down and thought this through. So usually they just give you this, and I kept thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I had a way to not have to turn this to loosen this so that I can move this and point it at stuff? Oh wait, look, there's this. I can twist this and then I can move it easily, I thought. And then as I was using it, I realized, oh wow, look at that. There's an even easier way. There's this little thing here I can turn for fine movement. And I kept discovering over and over little things that I somehow hadn't even noticed that when I first started out, which I find kind of funny. I hadn't even noticed it. So there's a lot of little extra bells and whistles like that. This is, I believe, a 1 kilogram weight, and this counterweight's not bad. It's not good enough, in my opinion, to handle the heaviest scopes that this unit is capable of carrying. In my opinion, I used physics to calculate exactly what the length would have to be on a rod with the weight on the end of it to calculate to handle counterbalancing a heavy payload, and I'm going to need to find a larger rod. But for most of my telescopes, the smaller ones that I have, this is not a problem. So let me put this down and show you the second thing that doesn't come with this that you should get. And it comes from the manufacturer, mind you, so you can get it from the manufacturer. And that's this wedge thing right here. So this unscrews on the side. This is the actual unit. All right, this thing right here is what points you at Polaris. You do not have to use this. You can use a ball mount. Now, if you get a goofy ball mount like this, I don't even know if I have one in my pocket. I thought I had a cheap one. If you use a goofy ball mount like this little thing, and you put it on, and you hook it to a regular telescope, it's going to just fall right over. You need a heavy ball mount if you're going to use a ball mount. One thing that turned me off of this unit was all the photographs I saw on the internet showed it connected with a ball mount. They didn't have this wedge thing at all. They had a regular regular tripod with a ball mount connected to it, and I thought to myself, my God, that looks flimsy. And it totally threw me off. That was one of the major turnoffs to me not wanting to buy this. Once I found that it came with this, oh, that made things much better. Now I all of a sudden was interested in getting it. Now, if you have a tripod that has a screw that you can connect underneath here and then hook a ball mount to, or even a regular photography tripod, you can get a heavy ball mount like this guy. This is a reasonably heavy ball mount. This is the one of the heavier ones you're going to get before you start getting into the expensive range. This is still in the $20 to $30 range. The price shoots up all of a sudden after this. With a heavier ball mount, you can connect this unit, right, and then put it on top of a mount, and then you can adjust it to point at Polaris, and then the mount will work perfectly fine. You just have to zero this in on Polaris. The problem, however, is even this ball mount has a lot of trouble holding that much weight. And once you start getting into the ball mounts that are capable of holding the amount of weight that's desired, they tend to be kind of expensive. Now, if you're a professional photographer and you're looking to take long exposures at wide angles, you probably already have a heavier ball mount, in which case you don't need this. You can just use the ball mount you have. But for somebody who doesn't have a really heavy ball mount, I really recommend this thing. This thing is great. So first off, this lets you adjust. You have a little ratcheting adjuster here, so you can loosen this, and then you can, let me turn it so you can see. You can loosen this, and you can adjust this, by the way, to whatever's convenient. So just pull it out, put it where you find it convenient for tightening and loosening. Then you twist this to up and down the altitude here, and you can point this directly at Polaris without any trouble. So it has a little bubble mount right here. Now, I recommend when you're using this and setting it up to use a little bubble level right here, a spirit level, depending on what country you come from. And the reason I recommend you doing this is because if this unit is not absolutely perfectly straight, it will drift a little bit, and that's not a flaw of this unit. That's a flaw of all of these types of things. Any of these tracking mounts, they have to be absolutely leveled. I mean, the tiniest little bit of shake, the tiniest little bit of level, every one of them succumbs to this. And if you do astrophotography, you know what I'm talking about. In fact, people who spend hundreds of thousands to make those amazing, Hubble telescope-looking photographs, they literally stick a giant metal rod or a wooden rod or whatever into the ground, and they cement the dumb thing in place. and they use all kinds of equipment to be absolutely perfectly level and perfectly, aligned. Huge amounts of astronomy go into just alignment. So buy yourself a little $10, $20 level. Just double check. Make sure you're absolutely aligned when you're setting this up. Okay. Now for fine adjustment, you have an adjuster under here you can twist to get yourself more or less in location. But for fine adjustment, you twist these guys. It's kind of funny. If you twist them, it slowly turns the unit one way or the other. So I was sitting there one day trying to get this thing adjusted to Polaris. I'm like, oh God, I gotta twist this again. Oh, now it's off. Oh, let's try to twist this thing. And I thought to myself, what are these little things? Why didn't I look at them before? I should have already looked at them. So I tried twisting them. Oh my God, they automatically do it in the tiny little scale. You see, it's stuff like that that really sells me. I like little benefits, little things. Somebody thought about doing this. Somebody was like, hey, if I put this in, it will make the unit better. Now, I'd like some little micro positioning knob better. That would have been better. But I'll take this for the price. This isn't expensive, this whole unit. This thing is a must in my opinion. Unless you happen to have a really heavy ball mount, heavier than this one, then this is a must in my opinion. And what you can do is you can then take this, the actual unit, and slide it in place like so. Point it at Polaris. So adjust it. So let's get ourselves pointed at a Polaris. We are now, let's just say pointed at Polaris. Tighten it up. I'll show you how I'm doing the tightening. Adjust. I can pull this back out if I want to and adjust. There. Oh, I want to see the name Skywatcher, so I can just turn it outside of the way. Yay. So there it is. And now we're adjusted on Polaris potentially. Of course, we're not really adjusted. So let me talk about the unit a little bit. Now you'll notice on the side, this is another thing that threw me off when I first got this. Now this is my fault because basically I was like, oh, I don't like this. Oh, I don't like the way this looks. And this is something that threw me off, and it might throw some of you off, and I don't want you to be discouraged by it. I saw this and I thought to myself, this guy can't be adjusted. I don't like tracking mounts that don't have the ability to do fine adjustments. So like you can go in and make adjustments to the motors and everything like that. I like to be able to adjust these kinds of things. And I do computer science for a living, so that might have something to do with why I like to do that. So maybe some people don't care about that, but I saw this and I was like, oh God, this is a turn on, turn off kind of thing. Like you just turn it on, you turn it off. It doesn't really have any brains to it. Well, it is true that it doesn't actually allow you to do fine adjustment in a programmable sort of fashion. It actually does. There is a way to do it, but not as far as you and I are concerned right here, just touching it. But I discovered that its side rail rate is really, really, really accurate. I've gotten a lot of tracking mounts whose side rail rate is not right accurate, and there's basically nothing you can do about it. You just never can follow the target right. You end up having to mess with weights and stuff trying to counterbalance it such that it works correctly. This one side rail rate is extremely well done. I do not know if this thing actually has some of these have a little calibration device and a little disc or something that turns that has coded dots on it that then a photo sensor can see to determine if this thing is staying on target and correctly moving. I don't know if this has that or not, but it probably has something similar to that. Then it has a servo, so it knows how many pulses per second it's sending to the servo, so it probably is able to figure out by one means or another and stay calibrated, because so far it's stayed very calibrated. I haven't had any troubles with it. To spin this around for a second, you do have adjustment knobs, so you can speed up or slow down if you want to. You can also just adjust and point if you want to, but you can speed up and slow down if you want to get on target or off the target. So it's very easy to use. If I want to get this pointed at Polaris and then adjust it to point at a star, I can then turn it over here and point it to star. There's a little star indicator right here. And now we're moving at side rail. And we will sit there for, if you're just viewing, like just looking through the eyepiece, you'll probably be sitting on target for an hour or two without any problem. Easily without any problem. For photography, it depends on the focal length. For a 400 millimeter, like one of those little 80 millimeter achromatic refractor telescopes you see a lot of, you'll probably be able to get anywhere from 30 seconds to 60 seconds of exposure on a target. Now, what does that mean? That means the star will stay still for 30 to 60 seconds if you have it really well balanced. And that's important to get this thing weighted right. I'll talk about that in a minute. But 30 to 60 seconds for an unguided tracking mount is not bad. I know there's going to be somebody out there who's going to say, oh, I can do 45 minutes. No, that's great. But most of us can't. Realistically speaking, most tracking mounts that are unguided usually give up to about 30 seconds or so, plus or minus, before the star starts noticeably drifting. And that has a lot to do, though, with of course, the focal length. So if I take a telescope that has a larger focal length, let's say a 12 or 1300 millimeter Maxitov, you're going to get more like 15 to 30 seconds. That's a pretty long focal length for a small telescope that fits on one of these things, which is still a good amount of time. I'm going to show you some images I've taken from this to kind of prove what it can do. So anyway, it has a north and a south that you can switch, obviously, if you're above or below the equator. It has a USB input that you can connect to a battery pack. So I have a battery pack. Sorry, Skywatcher, it's the Celestron. So I have a Celestron battery pack I hooked this thing up to, and it works like a champ and feeds it battery power. It also has a, so pull it off here. It also has a set of batteries. These batteries right here are supposed to get like 50 or 60 hours worth of usage. I mean, that's unheard of for a device like this. I have never replaced these. They still work. They still work perfectly fine. I usually use my larger battery larger battery packs. That may have something to do with it. But at the same time, multiple times I've used just these batteries. Now, I will say, let me talk about a couple cons. So let me work for this for a second and try to tell you about a few of the cons. So the first con is, for such a well-made device, and this thing is like all metal. This is solid metal, by the way. This is like metal. I mean, it's got some plastic parts. I mean, it's not solid metal. Let me just rephrase it. There are some plastic parts, but mostly it's metal. And the parts that are plastic are really, really, really strong. There's bolts and knobs and stuff all over the place. All metal-y pieces right here. I love it. I like metal stuff. Sorry, I like heavy metal stuff. Plastic's great and all, but metal is metal. But for something so nice and metal, and this is all nice and metal, it has these goofy little plastic parts right here that don't feel like they should fit on well. Now, honestly, I figured this, and I'll show you these two parts in a moment. I figured they would be lost or broken in like 3 days. Now, literally, I've had this thing for a couple months, and they have not had any problems. It's been to multiple star parties. It's been all over the place. It's had no problems. So maybe I'm wrong, but I still am wary of plastic parts. So I call this a con. I don't care if it so far hasn't broken. I'm telling you it's a con in my opinion. I don't mean like a con isn't a con job. I mean like a con isn't like a pro versus con. It has a nice little nifty quick functions reference though that tells you how to set this thing up, because you can use combinations of these buttons, this switch, and these buttons right here to set up various time-lapse functions, which I'll cover in just a moment. So put you back into place. See, I don't like the way that fits in there. Now, I'm sure there's like probably some Skywatcher engineer who's like looking at me and saying, "Tom, you fool, you're not doing that right. If you just push this a certain way." So this is the part that annoys me. It annoys me there, getting that to fit in place. And part of that's my own fault, probably. I'm probably doing something wrong, but I mean, it should be a little more self-explanatory. This you look through to point at Polaris to make absolutely sure that you're dead on target, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. You look through this. This actually has a Polaris Star Finder scope right down the middle of it, because it comes out this hole here. And you look right through here. Well, you look through here, you see through here. I mean, that thing lets you get dead on target for making sure that it's pointed right at Polaris, so you're going to get the absolute best possible exposures. But here's the problem. This little cap's pretty thick, but this guy's big and plastic and cheap and doesn't sit on so well. You see how it's always wanting to fall off? It's kind of a little rickety. See? I have lost this like twice. Now, I found it again, but I lost it at a star party, and I lost it on the street. I keep finding it on the street. I was coming home from work, and I found it sitting on the street. I was like, oh, God, I lost this someplace. So this thing is very useful. Like, this is all nice and metal and good quality, and then this is rinky-dink. So this annoys me that this is here. Honestly, if this thing and this thing got lost, this thing would work perfectly fine, because they don't do anything. They're just caps. So this is a con, but it's not a bad con. So far the only cons I've had are some plastic parts that are not actually part of the unit. They're not functional. And I've had a few cons with with my own personal interpretation of how it looked, which threw me off, like the ball mount. And I will say one more con is that some of these components, like for example this, are a little expensive. But then again, on the flip side, we can say everything about astrophotography is expensive. There's really nothing cheap ever about astrophotography. So far those are my cons. When it comes to pros, I have a lot of pros. On the pro side, I find that this thing holds its tracking absolutely dead on. I mean, for unguided, I am amazed. By the way, I do believe that you can plug an auto guider, see it says auto guider, right into here and turn this into an auto guider. So you buy this guy here, and then maybe next year when you've saved a few more pennies up, you can buy yourself an auto guider and hook it up, and now you do have an auto guiding scope. Think about that for a second. Now all of a sudden, instead of spending $1,500 for an auto guided scope, you can spend $300-400 for this, and you can spend 2-300 for an auto guider, hook it up to this, and now you have that. Now, the benefit of the $1,500 scope, of course, is it can probably hold a 30-40 pound payload. So if you have a huge telescope, I keep saying scope, I mean mount. If you have a huge telescope, obviously this can't handle it. I believe this thing goes up to, I think it's 11 kilograms is its weight limit. 11 kilograms, or sorry, no, it's 11 pounds, I believe. So it's like, what is that in kilograms? 8 kilograms, something like that. I'll look it up and post it in the video. So it does have a weight limit. So this is going to be confined to smaller telescopes. But I find its main advantage is actually in using, let me just unscrew this and pull it off for you, is actually in using cameras. So this is an old camera, by the way, too. I'm not a professional photographer anymore. I used to be. My good camera is what's taking the photograph here. So this is an old camera from the 90s. So like, don't be like, oh my God, look at this old film camera. But this is an old camera from the 90s. I just used it for a prop because the good one's taking the photos. So it's useful for these kinds of cameras. Now, why is that true? Well, if you have a, here, let me show you the kind of lens you usually get. When a lot of people get a camera, and this is, by the way, I'm not talking about the professional photographers here. I'm talking about people that are amateur, they're starting out, they want to photograph stars. They usually get a basic camera body, not quite like this. Like I said, this is an older one, but they get the modern day version of this Rebel right here. Usually, something like this is a particularly common camera. So they get like a Rebel body. And I have this Rokinon wide-angle lens on this one right here. Get you on there. But they also usually get what's called a kit lens. So you'll get one or two of them, and they'll be a 35 millimeter to 70, or an 18 to 50, or something like that. Sometimes you'll get a zoom lens like this guy right here. So this is a 75 to 300 millimeter zoom lens. This is a pretty common one. Like this, see, a 75 to 300 millimeter. Lenses like this are kind of common. With a lens like this and that wide-angle lens that comes with your camera, and I'm talking about the one you bought yourself off of like Amazon. I'm not talking about the professional photographer and their expensive Sigma lenses. I'm talking about this kind of guy right here. You can take some really good photographs with something like this. Just remember the rule of 500. You take what you do is you take the number 500 and you divide that by whatever the focal length is, and that's the number of seconds you can keep this thing open without it even on. Once you cut this thing on, so it's actually following the target, you can expose for minutes with a lens like this. So if you put this in 75 millimeters and point it up at a star cluster, you can expose with this thing running for 1, 2, 3 minutes. Now, if you've ever done astrophotography before, you know that you can drink in a lot of light and bring in a lot of nebulas and stars and deep sky objects and a lot of interesting stuff in a minute or two, even with a lens like this. That's why it's so useful. You put this down. You can also go ahead and connect a telescope up to it as well. So an actual telescope like this guy right here. And that's perfectly fine too. But you're not going to get as long of exposure. So I typically would say that if you're looking for a device like this, I would be using nothing greater than about a 500 millimeter focal length on it if you want to get the maximum out of it. You can hook this 1300, it's a 1200 I think, right? 1300. You can hook this 1300 up to without any problem. But I wouldn't go over 500 millimeters if you really, really, really want to get the most out of this unit. I personally love using it. You want to get a mount like this so that you can also adjust it, because as it spins around your camera, the finer part of the camera that you see, the actual picture itself, the framing, is going to go at weird angles. So if you put the ball mount, you can adjust it. Let me show you what it looks like when you set a camera like this up to take wide-angle photos. Alright, so now we're ready to use this device pretty much the way it was designed. We have balanced the weight. See this weight right here? We've balanced it pretty well, so we're reasonably balanced. I'd recommend pointing it at whatever you're going to point at and then getting the balance of the weight right, because sometimes the way the camera points can adjust that a little bit. So we're pretty balanced, right? We could have mounted this directly to this actual component right here, and then we could have twisted it and adjusted it and everything. But by putting it on the ball mount, we have a kind of a benefit. If I were to turn like this at this weird angle, I can use the ball mount to then adjust the camera to be pointed the way I want it to be. So it gives me additional ability to adjust the camera, and then when I get the camera the way I want it, just tighten the ball mount up and it stays. Make sure you have a good ball mount. Like that little one I showed you earlier, you'll see them sometimes on Amazon for $5 or something. Don't buy those. Don't buy those. They're no good. I mean, they're good, but they're not good for this, and they're not good for what we're doing here. You want to get a more expensive one. $20-30 will work perfectly fine for a good ball mount. You don't require one. Especially if you're going to photograph like a star up in the sky. The reason is because a star up in the sky, it kind of doesn't matter what direction you're pointing the camera at it, it's still just a star. But if you're trying to get landscapes and wide angles, you'll want to probably get a ball mount. Okay, so let's adjust ourselves here. We're going to point at this landscape over here that we're going to photograph. That's not what we're going to photograph, but close enough. We look through the camera, get it adjusted the way we like it. Let's get it all nice and locked into place. All right, we look through here. Now it's time to adjust this thing. So how do we do that? You get this old strap out of the way. You tighten this. Look at this humongous locking piece right here. Look at this. This locks this locks the actual axes to the motor. All right. Look at this locking piece. It's the size of Kentucky. Look at this thing. It's extremely easy to use because it's so big. So we just sit here and we get ourselves adjusted and we lock right into place. There you go. Nice, good lock. There we go. We're locked into place, and let's adjust ourselves. We can twist this dial to go right and left until we get what we want. And we turn the device on and we put it on star. So now it's pointed at the stars. And it's now tracking. Now, we can at this point set our exposure on this camera to 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever the camera can handle, and we can expose a huge, vast amount of the sky. And we'll get a beautiful photograph if it's dark. I mean, if you have light pollution, you know, what can you do? But if it's dark, you get this beautiful picture. You'll have galaxies and all kinds of stuff could potentially show up in there, depending how dark it is, depending on the lens you have, and depending on the settings you use. But those things are now within your grasp, where they weren't before. Because if you used even a stable tripod, even with this lens right here, this lens is an 8mm lens, you could have only gotten about 58 seconds before motion blur starts becoming a problem. With this mount, that 58 seconds just became 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. And if you take a bunch of these photos, you can stack them together and get a really great picture. And a mount like this makes that now possible. That's one reason I like it. So we'll cut it off. There's several modes, by the way, that you can use. Adjust this right here a little bit. You know what? Let's just turn it the way I just said a few minutes ago. You can use it. So let's turn, so you can see. Turn. Okay, you have off, you have the ability to track stars. You can track the sun. You're like, well, why would you track the sun? First off, don't look at the sun. You'll burn your eyes out. But if you have a solar telescope, a telescope specifically designed for solar photos, you can use that. I know because I used it just a few days ago. Then you have the moon, so you can photograph the moon. Then you have 0.5 for extra slow, 2x, 6x, 12x, and off. So these speed you up. You're like, why would you want to speed up? Well, sometimes you might want to cause interesting effects. So, for example, if you want to make those the star spirally, twirly effects, the streaks, the streamer things I showed you earlier, one trick you can do is you can set the telescope to the opposite side. So set it to this to S if you're in the northern hemisphere, or N if you're in the southern. So it's going the wrong direction now, and set this thing to high speed. And what will happen is the camera is now going the wrong direction at extra speed. And that means you can get those star trails much quicker. Now that works only if you don't have anything in the background. If you have objects in the background, they will blur. So just make sure you're just pointing at the sky if you do something fun like that. By the way, that can be a lot of fun. Make sure this thing's off. And let's loosen it up. Loosen. Okay. So, very, very useful. I adore this thing. Let me also show you quickly what it looks like when you look through this, the Polaris Finder Scope. So let's look right on down here and see what we get. And as you look through the hole, you will see... Oops, it's hard to keep this thing pointed right. This right here allows you to find and center correctly Polaris using software, which tells you where Polaris should be in this marker. To line everything up, and you'll be dead center on Polaris, which is extremely useful. Okay, so I think I've given this a basic overview. In my personal opinion, and I've used plenty plenty of telescopes. I'm not an expert, I'm an amateur, but I belong to an astronomy club. I used very expensive, very large telescopes, and I've been doing this for a little while. I consider this guy to be the best bang for the buck right now. I don't know that anything better won't come out soon. I don't know that there is anything better in the market that I haven't seen, but I've used many other types of mounts. This is currently my go-to. It's easy to carry, it's small, it's portable. I can carry the whole thing in one hand, and I can just walk right outside after work, set this thing up, take photographs, come back in, and it's not even a thing. So, like, I mean, what's not to like? I'll be going out to a place in West Virginia, which is going to be really, really, really dark in probably a month or so. And I'm taking this guy out and some other equipment, and I'm going to see what I can get. Some really good clear dark skies, nice dark place. We'll see what kind of photographs I have, and I'll post those out for all of you guys to see. I love this thing. I will keep using it as well as some of my other equipment. I did, like I said before, I got it for free. I don't usually do that, but there you go. And I think I've made it abundantly clear so nobody can be like, oh, you didn't say that it was for free. I absolutely recommend this guy. So if you have any questions about it, let me know. Some stuff I do and don't know, and I might just refer you to the manufacturer if I don't know some of the particulars about it. I'm still learning a little bit of it myself. It's really an awesome scope, and I haven't even mentioned all of the benefits that it has. Like, for example, it has this little guy right here that lets you figure out the position of Polaris in the scope without even having to look it up, for example. Just an extra benefit it has. But I think I'll go into those at a later date. So this has been me whining enough about this device. So this has been Tom from anti-proton.com. I hope you enjoyed this, and here's some photos.